This is what AEW is all about. If you've been keeping up with my videos, then this is probably the millionth time you've heard me say this. I love the Continental Classic. At a time where my personal interest in the company was starting to wane, this tournament just stormed onto the scene and reminded me of why I love professional wrestling in the first place. Despite what the clickbait wrestling media might be saying, AEW has been putting on good to great shows since this tournament began. There's been nothing but constant negativity when it comes from so-called journalists, podcasters, and content creators, so I'm here to encourage anyone watching this video to start a discussion in the comment section on what you love the most about the Continental Classic. Because for me personally, it's hard to even choose what my favorite aspect of the whole thing has been. There's been matches with the big fight feel, great in-ring work, layered storytelling, and emotional depth. This isn't to say that AEW TV has been without its faults, but it's been much more focused and perhaps more importantly, it knows what it wants to be. Remember my video on AEW's identity issue? It's unrealistic for me to expect AEW to address every issue I brought up in my video, but since the start of the C2, it's almost like they remembered what brought a lot of people to the dance. We want to see great wrestling with nuanced storytelling. There's a reason why when AEW first came to be, a lot of us hoped that they would eventually do their own version of New Japan's G1 Climax tournament. And trust me, I had high hopes for this thing going into it. I was done giving AEW the benefit of the doubt, but to my surprise, this tournament has been a smash hit. Not just for me, but for the majority of the fan base from what I've seen. So without further ado, let's talk about AEW's latest success, the Continental Classic. Before I get to why I love this tournament and the future implications it could have on the product, I'd like to take just a brief moment to point out just how dumb the Western wrestling fanbase really is. Some people think this tournament is confusing, some people think it's too complicated, some people can't count to 3. If that's you, please click away from this video and go watch one of the British clickbait wrestling channels. I never realized just how badly our schooling system has failed us until I saw the replies under one of AEW's tweets which showed us the current scores. I just want to say that those people deserve the dumbed down storytelling that other promotions have been offering for decades. A round robin tournament format being too hard to follow, despite it being the system that every major sport uses, is hilarious to me. Anyway, that's enough laughing at the kids who ate glue in class. For those who watch New Japan, or for those who watch literally any sport, we all know how this format works. In a round robin tournament, we see every wrestler in their respective group, league, division, or whatever you want to call it, wrestle each other once. A win gets you 3 points, a draw gets you 1 point, and a loss gets you 0 points. This is literally just the league system for European football. Or perhaps a better comparison for a more American audience, it's literally just the NBA in-season tournament structure. There's no set number to move on to the semifinals. The two wrestlers with the most points at the end of the league phase face each other in the semis for a place in the final against the other group winner. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, the reason why this format works is because it calls for strategy from the wrestlers. Taking a loss doesn't automatically mean you're eliminated. For example, Rush lost his first match of the tournament against Jay White, and yet he still has a chance to reach the final because of the points system. When it comes to European football, there's a reason why some believe that winning a league with this system is better than winning a single knockout tournament. A round-robin tournament requires consistency. In other words, the best team usually wins. In a classic knockout tournament though, the best team doesn't always win because upsets happen. That's the reason why a setup like this is so special in wrestling, especially when the playing field is as stacked as this one is. Seeing the likes of Rush, Jay White, Moxley, and Swerve battling it out in the same group automatically makes this the most stacked tournament in AEW history. Then you have the other block, which features Danielson, Andrade, Claudio, and Eddie Kingston trying to punch their ways into the semifinals. In order for this tournament to be an instant success, it was going to have actual threats, unlike in previous AEW tournaments. The fact that like 8 different wrestlers could realistically win this thing is why it instantly grabbed the attention of the AEW fanbase. It was now up to AEW to deliver a tournament that lived up to its name. When the field for the tournament was introduced, the only name that people really questioned was Jay Lethal, and even then that was more so down to his star power rather than his in-ring ability. Which leads me to my next point. This tournament is stacked with fantastic in-ring talent from top to bottom. Some of the best wrestlers in the world are competing in the C2 in order to make this a successful first iteration. And the matches we've already gotten out of this tournament have lived up to the hype. The fact that we got matches such as Rush vs Jon Moxley and Swerve vs Mark Briscoe on the same TV episode shows the quality of the tournament. We also had Claudio versus Kingston and Danielson versus Andrade on the same Collision episode as well. And honestly, Andrade versus Danielson might just be my match of the tournament so far. Not only did we see a Danielson still recovering from his eye injury give it his all, but we also saw Andrade finally rise to the occasion in a huge way in AEW. I was legit shocked when Andrade got the upset over Danielson, and that's exactly what the C2 is all about, moments like these. Because of this tournament, Andrade has finally proven he could and should be standing toe-to-toe with the very best that AEW has to offer. And it's not just Andrade. Rouge, Swerve, and Brody King have all had breakthrough moments in this tournament that have made them look like $1 million. If anything, the C2 has highlighted just how truly stacked AEW's roster is. And props to the veterans in Danielson and Moxley for helping everyone they've wrestled look really good as well, even in defeat. Do I wish we could have had someone like Kenny Omega in this tournament? Yes, of course, but if his body still isn't ready for that kind of schedule, then I'd be willing to wait 1 year in hopes that we can get him in next year's C2. And while I've sang the praises of this year's tournament, I get even more excited thinking about the possible field for next year's Continental Classic. We can possibly have the likes of Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, Adam Cole, and many others joining in. And speaking of the future of the C2, there's another thing I'd like to address. As I've already said from top to bottom, this tournament has been near perfect in my eyes. The one glaring issue I have with it is maybe one that others might not care about, but in my case I think it could make a huge difference in further elevating the Continental Classic as the most prestigious tournament in American pro wrestling. What would I do differently? Change what the winner gets for winning the C2. As of right now, my only concern with this tournament is that the prize is this so-called Triple Crown title, which would see the winner become the first ever AEW Continental Champion alongside winning the ROH World title and New Japan's Strong Openweight title. Frankly, this is overstuffing just to overstuff. For one, I really wish AEW hadn't added another title. Secondly, adding 2 other titles which aren't even that high on the totem pole in 2023 might I add, is a little too much for me personally. I know that I'm critiquing before I've seen it play out, but I don't think I'm criticizing in bad faith when I say that the grand prize is overstuffed. Honestly, this is a case where I wish AEW would have just played it safe and kept it simple. If it were up to me, the winner of the Continental Classic would receive a trophy and a shot at the world title at, let's say, AEW Revolution. That's how you elevate this tournament even more so, making the grand prize a shot at the grand prize in AEW. It's essentially what New Japan does for the G1, with the only major difference being that the winner gets a shot at their biggest show of the year, Wrestle Kingdom. Now, I wish the C2 wasn't so far away from AEW's biggest show of the year, All In, because then I'd say that the winner should receive their world title shot at that show. That would arguably make this the most prestigious wrestling tournament in the world if you ask me. But because the C2 will be reserved for the winter, I'd settle for the winner receiving a world title shot at Revolution. Not only would you add prestige to the tournament like this, but you'd also add prestige to Revolution itself. I really hope AEW reconsiders the grand prize for the C2 and just keeps it simple. Because while the Triple Crown idea sounds kinda decent in theory, it just muddies everything up. Imagine seeing the best wrestlers in AEW such as MJF, Will Ospreay, Jay White, and Kenny Omega all battling it out in the C2, knowing that whoever wins gets an AEW World title shot at the next pay-per-view. It just writes itself. I'm known as the hyperbolic, overdramatic, reactionary AEW YouTuber, so here's a hyperbolic, overdramatic, and completely reactionary statement from me. The Continental Classic saved my fandom for AEW. Okay, maybe that's a bit too overdramatic even for me, but if you've seen my videos over the past couple of months, I was becoming disillusioned with the inconsistent quality of the product. AEW was starting to lose sight of why many people like me turn to them as the alternative of professional wrestling. We want something different. Yes, of course, we want stories, but they don't have to be the dumbed down kind. Give us the type of storytelling that we got during the Hangman Saga. Keep having all the top guys interacting with each other, and keep investing in the Continental Classic. The C2 has turned the month of December, which is historically a terrible month for wrestling, one that I will look forward to each year if it's of the quality of the inaugural tournament. What AEW has found is a solution to finishing the calendar year strong and building anticipation for the start of the next year. No longer will December be full of filler like it tends to be in wrestling. But more importantly, this should serve AEW as a reminder to their initial mission statement, being the most elite wrestling company on the planet that attracts the likes of Bryan Danielson, to push themselves to the limit in AEW, and more particularly in the Continental Classic. You know how there's wrestlers every year outside of Japan who dream of doing the G1? That's what I want the Continental Classic to become. The premier tournament in the Western wrestling world that attracts the best in-ring competitors to join AEW. I want the Continental Classic to truly be classic.